Hey, this is MJ, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about gauge for the Granny Pop garment crochet along. So those of you that have joined the crochet along, I'm doing up this little video to accompany the guide that's included with the ebook. If you're interested in joining the crochet along or getting the details for that, just click on the link in the description box below this video and you'll get all the details about the crochet along. And when you sign up, you're going to get this guidebook that is going to help you meet the gauge for the Granny Pop patterns that are included in the crochet along and in the ebook. So we'll be making a gauge swatch together for this collection, and we'll be using Mary Maxim Prism yarn to do our swatch. And the hooks that you're going to need are a 5mm as well as a 4.5mm. And I'm using Furl's Taurus streamline hooks, and I find they do gauge a little bigger than some of my other hooks. So you may have to adjust your hook size to meet the pattern gauge, and that is okay. Just use whatever hook to get the gauge needed. So when a pattern has a pocket, it's always a great place to start if you want to make a gauge swatch with your pocket. It gets you on track, it's simple, it's quick, and then you have a pocket done and your swatch as well. As long as your pocket is a fair size, it's not too small, then a pocket is a good way to make your gauge swatch. So we're going to start out with a slip knot on our hook, and we're going to chain 20. And now in the second chain from the hook, we're going to turn and go into that back bump, and we'll work single crochets in the back bumps of the chain. Now, if for any reason you're struggling with that, just go in the back loop of the chain. This just makes a little bit nicer edge for sewing the pocket on across the bottom, and I just love the finish of doing this, so I usually go in the back hump whenever I'm starting off a project with a chain. Okay, so you should have 19, and now I'm going to chain 3 and work 3 double crochets in the same stitch. Now I'll chain 1, skip a stitch, work a double crochet in each of the next 3. Chain 1, skip a stitch, work a double crochet in each of the next 3. Chain 1, skip a stitch, double crochet in each of the next 3. 1, 2, 3, chain 1, skip a stitch, double crochet in each of the next 3. Chain 1, skip a stitch, and in the last stitch we're going to work 4 double crochet. And don't worry that that starting foundation row is a little bit skinnier than the rest of the pocket. That's completely okay. All right, so let's take a look. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clusters No, this isn't quite into our cluster yet, but we're going to count that as a cluster. And now we're going to chain 4. Okay, turn our work. And now in the chain 1 spaces, we'll be doing a cluster chain 1. So 1, 2, 3, chain 1. And we're going to repeat that across in each chain 1 space. Chain 1. I'm just going to work this across now. So I've already chained 1, and now in the turning chain we're going to work a double crochet. And now if we look at this, we've got 5 clusters and 2 double crochets, so 6. So we're going to alternate between 6 and 5, 6 and 5 as we work. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll work 3 double crochets in the chain 1 space. Chain 1, chain 1, and work all the way across. Okay, so I've ended with 4 double crochets in our final stitch, back up to 6 clusters, and now this is row 3, this is row 4. So we're going to alternate rows 3 and 4 until we have a total of 10 rows. So for this particular pattern, the gauge is in 4 inches, and we have 4 clusters and 4 chain 1 spaces. So this is definitely wide enough. You always want to go over 4 inches. So when you look at a pattern, it's not always in 4 inches. Sometimes it's in 2, or sometimes it's just what the designer has said for the pattern. If there's a certain repeat, they may be measuring the repeat and not the actual stitches. So make sure to check the pattern and see what they're specifying, but quite often it will be 4 inches. So you want to make sure you're also going longer, so not just the width you need to consider, but also your height. So how many rows? So if the pattern like this one calls for 7 rows and 4 inches, you definitely want to do more than that. So I'm doing 10, which is the perfect amount to get a good indicator of our swatch. And all we need to do is change our hook size. If you're using a different yarn than what I am using, it may be a bit tricky to meet the gauge, but if you're using the same yarn, it's just a matter of you playing with your different hooks to get your gauge to match. Now, sometimes what can happen is you're meeting it widthwise, but not for your rows. So your stitches are on track, but your rows are off. So sometimes you can do a few different tricks with how you crochet to get a little bit more height to your stitches. So you could pull up a little bit more on the stitch as you work just to elongate it. You could give it a little tug to shorten it. Another tip, if you're just off by rows and you don't want to alter the way you crochet, you want to keep crocheting just as you normally would, you could potentially add some additional rows. So for instance, my daughter's working on the cardigan and she met the gauge for her stitches. So she had the right stitch count, but her stitches were not quite as long. So she's had to end up adding some additional rows to get the pattern to match up correctly. So that's something that you could also do. If you just need to add a few rows here and there, add a little extra length to your sleeves, a little extra length to the body, and then it will work out fine. It's going to fit you based on your stitches for this style of pattern. Unless you're working from the side across, then the fit will be based on rows. But if you're working it from the top down or the bottom up, your stitches across are going to be what your measurement is for your fit. Okay, so I've worked my total of 10 rows, and I have this gauge tool. You can just use a measuring tape, really whatever you want. I find the work does stretch out a bit once you've made it, so I like to kind of just give it a little bit of stretch. I'm not blocking it or anything, I'm just giving it a little bit of a stretch, just because I know this yarn, when I get working with it, it will stretch out a bit. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4 clusters, and 1, 2, 3, 4 chain 1 spaces. So that makes it really simple, but you can just use a regular measuring tape and measure as well. I got this gauge tool from Crochet, so I really like having that on hand because it does really help. And that's why you need to make it bigger, so that you can kind of play around, get in a good spot. You could probably even do a few more rows because our first row here is just a single crochet. Another little handy tool that I picked up from Knit Picks Crochet is the wraps per inch, and this will really help you kind of determine a good yarn substitute. So it gives you roughly how many wraps you can wrap around this. Super bulky 5 to 6, bulky 7, Aran 8, worsted 9, DK 11, sport 12, fingering 14, lace 16 plus. So if you wrap your yarn, it will give you a good idea. So I wrapped my DK weight yarn and I did get 11 wraps. And all you do, let me just show you. So you just take your yarn and you just wrap it. And you don't want to overlap your wraps. You just want them going right next to each other like this, okay? And see how many wraps you can get. So when you're looking for a substitute for this yarn, which is Mary Maxim Prism, it's a DK weight and it's right on with how many wraps per inch I should have for a DK weight yarn. So now the best value yarn that I've also used for this pattern is actually a worsted weight yarn, and I just wrapped it to kind of get an idea on how it's wrapping. I should try the Prism tends to go thick thin, so you get a little bit of different consistency with it. But so I've wrapped this around. So if I'm doing this correctly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I actually have 13 wraps, so that's kind of a sport to fingering weight. It's kind of falling in, but I have working it up. I've found that it was very similar to the Prism. So I've already tested that out for you, and I know that it's gauging the same. Everything's good. So this will give you a good idea. I'm going to wrap the Prism again and see if I was getting some bulkier sections of it and see what it comes out at. Okay, so I just did that again and I have 13. I feel like I could almost get 14 in there. So, you know, here we go, testing out how many wraps per inch. And as you can see, sometimes what a yarn is labeled can definitely vary from what we have on here. And like I say with this one, we're going to come to sections where it's thicker. So when I wrapped it before, I was closer to the 11. So I think this is a closer, probably DK sport weight. But obviously this worsted weight that I'm using, even though it's classed a worsted, it's wrapping up much thinner. And so when I've told people, you know, look at worsted, I've said a light worsted, and that's because this really is much lighter than most worsted weights that you're going to find. Okay, so we've worked through our gauge swatch, we've discussed our wraps per inch tool, and now I just have another tip when looking at yarn and looking for substitutes. So let's take a look at the yarn labels to sort of sort this out. So Prism yarn has 290 yards on a 100-gram ball. If you divide 290 by 100, you're going to have a value that you can compare to other yarns. Now, sometimes this is not completely accurate based on the weight and the fiber. So this yarn here is super light and kind of airy because it's a roving, whereas I find the best value is a heavier, dense yarn. So the comparison doesn't work really well with these particular yarns. But in a lot of cases, it will give you a good indicator as to sort of that thickness, again, of the yarn like we were doing with the wraps per inch. So having one of these tools is great to have to compare yarns, especially if you're wanting to grab something out of your stash and you're wondering, okay, is it comparable to Prism? How many wraps am I going to get for this yarn I have at home, or this yarn that I can get in a local store? I know I have a lot of you joining in that are from the UK and you can't get the yarn that we're using in the crochet along. So having this tool is great, and also having this little tip is going to be helpful as well. So if you're looking at comparing 100-gram balls, it's pretty easy. You want something around 290. But sometimes balls are different sizes. You could be looking at a big ball, a 50-gram ball. So it's a good idea to just do this calculation out. 290 divided by 100, which is pretty simple. That's 2.9. And then I just have some other balls of yarn. These are 100-gram balls, so they are really easy to compare. So this is a medium worsted weight yarn, but you can see that it has a little less yardage on a ball. So it has 262 yards per 100 grams. So that's pretty close. It might be slightly thicker, but you know, looking at it, I think this would sub really well. These are some Mary Maxim yarns I have. So another one from Mary Maxim is Mellow Spun DK. And it is a light number 3. So it's labeled the same as Prism. And it has 284 yards. So really close, only 6 yards less on the 100-gram ball. So this is going to make a good substitute as well. Now I'm looking at couple other brands. So Brava Tweed, Mighty Stitch Worsted. These are worsted weight yarns. As you can see, 218. That's going to be quite a bit thicker. So when you're doing your number, when you divide, so 2.18 is what you're going to get when you divide this out. So the smaller the number, the thicker the yarn is going to be. The bigger the number, the smaller or thinner the yarn is going to be. So these ones here, and this one's 208. So these are probably not going to be the best if you use them. Let's say you have some worsted and you're going to go with something like this. I would say maybe size down in your pattern, because without having to make any other alterations, if you size down, might account for the pattern, the pattern coming out bigger, the garment coming out bigger. So let's look at a few more. Okay, so I have some more in my stash I grabbed. So this is Impeccable. This is a yarn from Michaels, and it is, let me see. So this is a 127-gram ball. It has 285 yards. So at first glance, you may think, oh, this one looks, it's almost the same yardage, but it actually has more grams on a ball. So again, it's going to be a little bit thicker, but when I look at it, you know, it still seems fairly thin. I would maybe do the wraps per inch with it to kind of get a better idea. Here's another yarn again. So this is a sport weight. This has 328 yards per 100 grams. So it's definitely going to be thinner than Prism, but you may find you want your yarn to be a little bit lighter weight, and it's not that drastic of a difference. Like, it's not a huge difference. There's, you know, about 38 more yards on this than this, but not like a massive difference. Now here's where we're getting into a bigger ball, and this is where the math really comes in handy. So we have 658 divided by 284. So I'm going to do that math and see how this compares. So this one ends up being 2.3, okay? But then looking at it, it looks pretty thin to me. It really does look pretty thin, and it's also rated a 4. And this is where sometimes the fiber, you know, definitely, yeah, I can tell it looks a little bit thicker. But again, this yarn goes thick thin, so it can vary. Let's see it compared to the best value, just looking at it. Yeah, I would say that I know some people have picked this respun up, and I think it would definitely work for this project. So play around, look at your yarn labels, see what's going to work. This pattern has a lot of give to it because it is oversized. It's pretty easy to size down if you need to, if your yarn's a little bit heavier. So when I do the math with the best value, it comes out closer to a 2, but it is a little bit heavier yarn, so I know that it does work well. So what I'm saying is that these are just some tips that you can do. Like if you're in a yarn store, you can do the easy math without actually purchasing it. If you have your yarn at home, you can kind of look at that. You can use this tool. Before you go to the work of making the gauge swatch, it's good to kind of have an idea like this is going to be close, and then make your gauge swatch and see how you like the drape, how it looks, and try to adjust your hook just to get it to match the pattern gauge. So now here are some pockets that my daughter did for the longer cardigan that we are doing for the hoodie, and she is crocheting much tighter. She didn't adjust her hook size to meet the gauge. She went with the hook that I used and just went with it. So I had her make a medium because I knew the medium would come out smaller based on what her gauge is. And because I normally would make a small when the pattern's oversized for myself, and she would want the same size, we just went with that, even though her gauge was definitely off from the pattern. So sometimes it works, and this is with the best value. So this is actually with the heavier yarn, and her gauge came out smaller because she made the pocket. So originally I think she was going to make a small, but because I could tell it was coming out much smaller, rather than her ripping out her work, I said, just make a medium instead and it will be fine. So there's always ways, you know, you can save your project. With a top down, you can try it on as you go. So if you've been crocheting looser, you may want to make a size smaller. If you're crocheting super tight, you might want to go up a size. With this style of pattern, it's super flexible that way and makes it really easy to make a quick adjustment. Whereas if you're piecing together another pattern, it may be a completely different situation. You want to make sure that you're on track with that swatch. And this stitch being as it is, it's still going to look nice and have nice drape, even though she's made it tighter. I hope this video was helpful and that you'll click through our description box and go sign up to get your guide to gauge for the Granny Pop Cal. You're going to get that for free. Now, if after the crochet along's over and you're watching this video, I do have guides to gauge available in my Etsy shop. So I will also link that below for you, and that would apply to any pattern that you're working on. It will give you tips and tricks on how to meet gauge, how to adjust gauge, how to block. All kinds of details are included in that. So if that's of interest to you, I'll drop the link there. But if you're seeing this and it's during the month of September, you're going to get this guide when you sign up for our crochet along. So make sure to do that and join our Facebook community group to join in the fun, post your pictures, show us what MJ pattern you're working on. We'd love to see you in the group. Thanks so much, guys. Have an awesome day.